Ethan Sinclair wasn't just facing another business event. Tonight's gala was a battle for survival. His company, Sinclair Enterprises, once a titan in the industry, was now drowning in controversy. Reports of unethical labor conditions had driven investors away, and the media was relentless in their attacks. If he didn't turn the tide tonight, everything he had built could crumble. As Ethan reviewed his strategy, his assistant Daniel entered with a tense expression. "There's a problem," he said. "Olivia just backed out." Ethan's head snapped up. "What do you mean, backed out?" "She had a family emergency. She won't be there." Ethan exhaled sharply, irritation creeping in. Olivia had been his ideal choice, poised, articulate, the very image of success. "And what's our alternative?" Daniel hesitated, then suggested, "Maybe someone from the office?" Ethan almost dismissed the idea outright, but his gaze drifted toward the lobby. That's when he noticed Emma Brooks, the receptionist. She was stacking parcels with an air of quiet efficiency, her posture straight, her movements precise. There was a natural elegance about her, something composed yet effortless. "She'll do," Ethan decided. "Bring her up." Minutes later, Emma stood in his office, uncertain but composed. She had never been summoned by the CEO before. "Mr. Sinclair," she greeted politely. Ethan regarded her, weighing his decision. "I need you to accompany me to an investor gala tonight. Your role is simple: be presentable, be polite, and keep conversation to a minimum. Understood?" Emma blinked, caught off guard. It wasn't a request, it was an order. She wasn't sure why he had chosen her, but she sensed this was an opportunity. "Yes, sir," she answered, keeping her voice steady. Ethan turned to Daniel. "Make sure she's appropriately dressed. Something professional. We leave at 7. By the time the clock struck 7, Emma was ready. She wore a sleek black dress, understated yet sophisticated. Though she felt out of place, she straightened her shoulders, determined not to let it show. Ethan, already waiting in the car, gave her a brief glance and nodded. "You follow instructions well," he noted. "Let's go." The drive to the Langston Hotel was heavy with silence. Ethan mentally rehearsed his approach for the investors, while Emma tried to make sense of why she was here. As they arrived, Ethan turned to her once more. "Stay professional. Keep a low profile. That's all." Emma didn't respond, but inside, she knew this night had the potential to change everything. Not just for Ethan Sinclair or Sinclair Enterprises, but for herself as well. As they stepped into the dazzling glow of the gala, she felt the weight of countless eyes upon her. Tonight, the unexpected guest had arrived. The ballroom sparkled with extravagance. Crystal chandeliers bathed the space in golden light, and the air buzzed with quiet conversations and clinking glasses. Everywhere, men and women dressed in the finest designer attire exuded wealth and influence. Ethan Sinclair stepped inside with his usual air of detached confidence, his presence commanding attention. Beside him, Emma Brooks held her head high, though she could feel the weight of curious gazes. The guests whispered among themselves, who was this woman accompanying the powerful CEO? Some assumed she was a hired escort. Emma caught the silent judgments but refused to acknowledge them. "Stay close," Ethan muttered without looking at her. "Of course, sir," she replied, her voice neutral but steady. Still, beneath the surface, her resolve only strengthened. As they moved through the crowd, a group of influential investors approached, led by Henry Lancaster, a sharp-eyed businessman known for spotting both opportunities and weaknesses. "Ethan," Henry greeted, shaking his hand firmly before his gaze shifted to Emma. "And who might this be?" His polite smile carried a hint of curiosity. Before Ethan could answer, Emma spoke with quiet confidence. "Emma Brooks. I work at Sinclair Enterprises." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. "Interesting." Henry seemed intrigued. "What's your take on the company's current challenges?" Emma felt the weight of the question. It was a test, perhaps even a trap. But she also recognized an opportunity. "Every business faces challenges," she began carefully. "But I believe meaningful change is possible, especially when leadership prioritizes the human element." A brief silence followed. The investors exchanged glances, surprised by her response. Ethan's expression remained unreadable, though the tension in his stance betrayed his discomfort. The conversation shifted toward corporate responsibility, with Ethan sticking to his usual script: profits, market strategies, and future projections. Henry, however, seemed unimpressed and turned back to Emma. Miss Brooks, since you work at the company, how do you think Sinclair Enterprises can regain public trust? Emma noticed Ethan stiffen beside her, but she also knew this was her moment. To rebuild trust, it takes more than just a PR campaign, she said, meeting Henry's gaze. We need to listen to employees, to customers, understand their experiences, invest in actions, not just numbers. That's how real connections are formed. For a moment, the table fell silent. Then Henry chuckled. Finally, someone with a fresh perspective. A few other investors murmured in agreement. Ethan, now visibly irritated, attempted to regain control. Emma isn't familiar with the complexities of leadership. She's here to observe. Henry's smile didn't waver. Sometimes, an outsider's perspective is exactly what's needed. Ethan. By the end of the evening, Emma had captured the attention of several key investors. Many approached her personally, commending her insight and clarity. Ethan, however, remained silent. The drive back was tense, the atmosphere in the car thick with unspoken frustration. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. You completely disregarded my instructions. Emma turned to him, composed yet firm. I answered their questions. I didn't do anything wrong. Ethan's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. You drew attention to yourself. That wasn't supposed to happen. She didn't respond. Deep down, she knew she had crossed a line. But she also knew she had impressed the right people. As the car wove through the city streets, Emma felt an undeniable certainty. This night had changed everything. For better or worse, there was no going back. By the time Emma arrived at the office the next morning, the tension was palpable. Conversations hushed as she passed, and stolen glances followed her every move. Word of what had happened at the gala had spread. Some colleagues looked at her with newfound curiosity, others with silent approval. But Emma knew only one opinion truly mattered. At exactly 9 a.m., a notification flashed across her screen. Emma, my office, now. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. Then, without hesitation, she rose from her chair and made her way to the CEO's office. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, Ethan stood by the window, his back turned. Ethan Sinclair stood by the window, his hands buried in his pockets. His voice was cool, controlled. Sit down. Emma Brooks complied, keeping her expression neutral. You disobeyed me last night, he said, finally turning to face her. His gaze was unreadable. I told you to stay in the background. Instead, you became the center of attention. Emma frowned but held her ground. I answered their questions. I didn't overstep, Mr. Sinclair. His expression remained impassive. It's not your place to decide that. You were there to accompany me, not to voice your opinions. A flicker of frustration sparked in Emma's chest, but she kept it in check. If my answers helped improve the company's reputation, then I contributed in a meaningful way. Ethan exhaled sharply, then tapped the desk, a silent signal that their conversation was over. You don't get it. I can't afford distractions. You're fired. The words, though expected, still stung, but instead of arguing, Emma stood, her movements measured. Understood. Her voice was steady, but her eyes held something firm, an unwavering sense of self-worth. Without another word, she turned and walked out. That afternoon, as she packed up her desk, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Miss Brooks, this is Henry Lancaster. I'd like to meet for coffee. There's something I'd like to discuss. Henry Lancaster, one of the key investors from the night before. Intrigued, Emma agreed. An hour later, they sat at a quiet cafe. Henry wasted no time. I'll get straight to the point, he said, leaning forward. Sinclair Enterprises needs a change, especially in its European division. He paused, studying her reaction before continuing. I was impressed with what you said last night. You have the kind of perspective we need in leadership. Emma tilted her head slightly. Are you offering me a job? Henry smiled. I'm offering you the position of CEO for the European division. The board will need to sign off, but I don't expect any resistance. Emma blinked. CEO? The offer was staggering, almost surreal. After years of being overlooked, she was now being handed an opportunity to lead something that mattered. She didn't hesitate. I accept, she said with quiet determination. 2 days later, Ethan Sinclair received news that sent a bolt of frustration through him. Henry Lancaster had officially nominated Emma Brooks as CEO of the European division. The board had approved it without question. Technically, she was still under the company's leadership. But now, she had a seat at the table. a position of influence that put her on equal footing with him. Let's play a quick game. If you're reading this far, type Burger King in the comments. Let's see who's really following the story. Now, back to it. When Ethan learned he'd have to sit through a strategy meeting led by Emma to align the company's global directives, his irritation was undeniable. For the first time, he would be facing her not as a subordinate, but as an equal. The meeting was scheduled at Sinclair Enterprises headquarters. When Emma arrived, she carried herself with a quiet confidence. Her attire was sharp, her materials meticulously organized. She stepped into the conference room where Ethan was already seated, surrounded by other executives. "Miss Brooks," he greeted with a forced smile. Or should I say, CEO Brooks? Emma met his gaze without hesitation. "Just Emma is fine, Mr. Sinclair." Then, without another glance, she opened her folder and began her presentation. Throughout the meeting, Emma spoke with clarity and authority, laying out strategies for implementing more ethical and transparent business practices. Some executives nodded in agreement, recognizing the value of her approach. Others, particularly those loyal to Ethan, resisted the changes. By the end of the discussion, the room was divided, but Emma had made her presence known. As the meeting wrapped up, Ethan approached her privately, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Impressive presentation," he said. "But I hope you realize, implementing these changes won't be easy," Ethan Sinclair said, his voice measured but firm. Emma Brooks didn't flinch. "I never expected it to be easy," she replied smoothly. "But I know how to handle challenges, Mr. Sinclair." Their eyes locked, tension crackling between them. Neither was willing to yield, but beneath the resistance, something unspoken lingered, a mix of respect, rivalry, and a battle yet to be won. As Emma exited the room, Ethan exhaled slowly. She was going to be far more difficult to deal with than he had anticipated. Yet, no matter how much he tried to push it aside, he couldn't shake the image of her unwavering determination. Emma, meanwhile, understood that accepting the role of CEO for Sinclair Enterprises' European division was just the beginning of a much larger challenge. She knew Ethan wouldn't make things easy for her, and internal resistance would be constant. But she was ready. She had a vision, and she wasn't about to back down. Ethan, on the other hand, kept a close watch on her every move. He couldn't decide if he admired her nerve or saw her as a direct threat. Either way, a confrontation between them was inevitable. A week after their initial meeting, Emma scheduled a video conference with the division's top executives, including Ethan. The purpose? To align all units with a new corporate code of conduct centered around transparency and ethical responsibility. True to form, Ethan joined late, straightening his tie as he sat down, his deliberate nonchalance unmistakable. Emma, unfazed, launched into her presentation. "These changes will require a cultural shift within the division," she explained, her tone measured. "But they're essential if we want to rebuild public trust and retain top talent." Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, waiting for his moment. When Emma opened the floor for questions, he spoke first. "This all sounds optimistic," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "But have you considered the operational costs? The last thing we need is to blow our budget on initiatives that might not even pay off." Emma held his gaze, her expression calm but firm. "Numbers are only part of the equation, Mr. Sinclair. Right now, our biggest cost isn't financial, it's reputational. Every dollar invested in transparency will be repaid through market trust and employee loyalty." A few executives nodded in agreement. Ethan narrowed his eyes slightly, realizing the room wasn't entirely on his side. As Emma detailed the practical implementation of the new policies, including comprehensive audits, Ethan cut in again. "Internal audits?" he scoffed. "Sounds like we're creating more problems than we're solving." Emma didn't hesitate. "We've been ignoring these problems for years, Mr. Sinclair. Pretending they don't exist won't make them disappear." A charged silence filled the room. Executives exchanged glances, some clearly torn between the two leaders. By the end of the meeting, Emma wrapped up with a final remark. "I know change is uncomfortable, but if we want to remain competitive, we need to think beyond short-term profits. This is a long-term commitment." Ethan said nothing, but his expression made it clear the battle wasn't over. After the meeting, Emma stepped into the hallway, only to find Ethan waiting for her. He blocked her path, his arms crossed. Do you really think you can walk in here and start giving me orders? Emma studied him for a brief moment before replying evenly. I'm not giving orders, Mr. Sinclair. I'm introducing changes that will benefit the company. If that feels like a challenge to your authority, maybe the real issue isn't with my proposals. Ethan took a step closer, closing the space between them. His voice dropped just slightly. Careful, Emma. You're treading on dangerous ground. She didn't move, didn't even blink. Don't underestimate me, Ethan, she said, her voice unwavering. A storm brewed in his eyes, but she simply turned and walked away, leaving him standing there. The battle lines had been drawn, and neither was willing to lose. Emma Brooks didn't back down. She met Ethan Sinclair's gaze without hesitation. I've been fired before for speaking my mind, she said, her voice steady. It didn't stop me from getting here. If you think intimidation will work, you've underestimated the wrong person. For a brief moment, silence stretched between them. The tension wasn't just professional. It was something heavier, more complicated. Ethan felt an odd mix of frustration and reluctant admiration for her defiance, while Emma sensed that beneath his arrogance was a man struggling to maintain control. In the days that followed, the tension between them became impossible to ignore. While Emma focused on driving change in the European division, Ethan used his influence to subtly stall her initiatives. Delays in approvals, unexpected bureaucratic hurdles, none of it was overt sabotage, but she knew exactly where it was coming from. Despite the resistance, Emma began gaining traction. Many executives appreciated her direct approach and willingness to listen, a stark contrast to Ethan's more authoritative leadership style. Momentum was shifting. By the end of the week, a notification popped up on Emma's screen, an unscheduled board meeting. Ethan had called it without informing her. She exhaled slowly, her eyes narrowing. He's up to something. But whatever game he was playing, she was ready. Emma received word of the meeting while she was at her desk, finalizing the rollout timeline for the new corporate policies. She knew Ethan wouldn't openly challenge her without a strategy. This was calculated. The next morning, she arrived at the boardroom early, composed and prepared. Executives filed in, murmuring amongst themselves. When Ethan entered last, a smug smile playing at his lips, Emma remained impassive. Once everyone settled, he leaned forward. Good morning, everyone, he began, his tone smooth. I've called this meeting to discuss some concerns about the financial impact of the new policies we're implementing. Emma took a deep breath. Here it is. Ethan presented a series of charts and graphs, highlighting the projected costs of the proposed audits and structural changes. He painted a grim picture: excessive spending, uncertain returns, and risks to profitability. Words like impractical and financially reckless echoed around the room. When he finished, the board members turned to Emma, waiting for her response. Without hesitation, she stood, grabbed a marker, and walked to the whiteboard. Let's talk about real costs, she said, drawing a bold line across the board. She gestured to the left side. Here, we have the financial losses from lawsuits, reputational damage, and employee turnover over the past 3 years. Then she pointed to the right. And here, the estimated costs of implementing the changes we're proposing. Emma turned back to the room, her gaze sharp. Now, let's be honest, she said. Which of these costs seems more sustainable in the long run? A hush fell over the boardroom, interrupted only by murmurs of agreement. Emma seized the moment. Ignoring these issues isn't a strategy, she continued. We can either address them now or watch as they spiral further out of control. The choice is ours. At the far end of the table, Robert McCain, one of the most senior board members, who had remained silent in previous meetings, cleared his throat. She's right, he said firmly. We've turned a blind eye to these problems for too long. It's time for a more responsible approach. Ethan leaned back in his chair, jaw tightening. Robert's influence carried weight, and within moments, other executives began nodding in agreement. The tide had turned. By the time the meeting ended, it was clear. Ethan had lost significant ground. Yet, rather than showing frustration, he simply gave Emma a slow, measured look. A look that said, "This isn't over." Then, without a word, he stood and walked out. In the weeks that followed, Ethan didn't sit idle. He worked behind the scenes, gathering allies within the company, preparing his next move. Emma had won this round, but the battle for control was far from finished. Ethan Sinclair wasn't done fighting. Under the guise of financial caution, he delayed budget approvals for projects under Emma Brooks' leadership, knowing full well that the setbacks would slow her progress. But Emma wasn't naive. She recognized his tactics for what they were: strategic sabotage. Yet instead of faltering, she adapted. She sought direct board approval where possible, worked around bureaucratic red tape, and found creative solutions to keep her initiatives moving forward. Every obstacle Ethan threw her way only sharpened her determination. And then the tension reached its breaking point. During the weekly executive meeting, Emma was presenting early results from a pilot audit at one of the European branches. The data was compelling. Employee satisfaction had risen significantly since implementing key changes. Ethan seized the moment to cut in. "And what about profits?" he asked, his voice deceptively casual. "Are you intentionally leaving that part out?" Emma met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm presenting measurable human impact. Financial results will be included in the quarterly report, as they always are." "How convenient," Ethan said, his tone laced with sarcasm. Emma took a slow breath before responding. "What's convenient, Mr. Sinclair, is using financial objections as an excuse to avoid necessary change." Silence blanketed the room. The executives exchanged glances, sensing the unspoken battle unfolding before them. Once again, Emma had left an impression, but the rift between her and Ethan only deepened. And it wasn't confined to the boardroom. The tension followed them to a high-profile corporate event where both had been invited to speak on the same leadership panel. Ethan took the opportunity to make a pointed remark. "Leadership is about decisiveness and clarity," he said. "You can't always please everyone. Sometimes, difficult decisions have to be made." Emma, when it was her turn, spoke with quiet conviction. "Leadership is also about adaptability and empathy," she countered. "The greatest leaders don't resist change. They embrace it and turn it into strength." The audience picked up on the charged energy between them, completely captivated. Despite their relentless clashes, something unexpected was beginning to take shape. Amidst the sharp exchanges and calculated maneuvers, there was a growing respect. Emma acknowledged Ethan's strategic mind, even if she despised his resistance, and Ethan, though unwilling to admit it, had started to admire her resilience. There were moments, brief but undeniable, where their glances held something different. A flicker of something neither was ready to confront. Not yet. Everything shifted when an urgent business trip forced them into close quarters. Due to strategic challenges at a European branch, both Ethan and Emma were assigned to travel together. The long flight began in complete silence. Emma, seated beside him, focused on reviewing documents. Ethan, staring out the window, was lost in thought. Finally, he broke the silence. "Ready to handle the tough questions?" His tone was edged with provocation. Emma didn't even glance up. "I'm always ready." Ethan smirked slightly, intrigued by her unwavering confidence. But something was different. The tension between them had shifted. The hostility wasn't as sharp. There was something else brewing beneath the surface. Less conflict, more curiosity. When they arrived at the branch, however, reality quickly set in. A critical meeting with local leadership revealed an unexpected issue. Productivity was lagging, and the managers claimed that Emma's proposed policies were being met with resistance. Ethan, always blunt, wasted no time in responding. Ethan Sinclair crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "I warned you that drastic changes could trigger resistance," he said, his voice even. "And now, here we are, dealing with the consequences." Emma Brooks met his gaze without hesitation. "It's not the changes causing the problem, Ethan. It's the lack of communication. We need to listen to what employees are actually saying." Determined to get to the root of the issue, she arranged a feedback session with the branch workers. Ethan, though skeptical, decided to accompany her. At first, the meeting was tense. Employees hesitated to speak, their frustration evident. But as Emma encouraged them, their concerns poured out. Many felt left out of the decision-making process, uncertain about what the new policies meant for them. Emma listened carefully, validating their concerns while offering adjustments that balanced their needs with the company's long-term goals. Ethan watched in silence, unable to ignore how effortlessly she navigated the conversation. She wasn't just pushing reforms, she was building trust, creating buy-in, leading. For the first time, he realized that maybe, just maybe, She wasn't the enemy he had made her out to be. After the meeting, they found themselves at a quiet local restaurant, the warm glow of candlelight softening the usual tension between them. The conversation, for once, flowed without sarcasm or sharp edges. After a moment of silence, Ethan finally spoke. "You were impressive today." Emma glanced at him, surprised by his sincerity. "Did you just compliment me?" A small, almost embarrassed smile flickered across his lips. "Apparently I'm capable of it, but only when I see something exceptional." Emma relaxed, letting herself enjoy the unexpected moment of peace. "You know, Ethan, sometimes you surprise me. When you're not trying to challenge me, you seem almost human." They both chuckled, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of their rivalry lifted. But deep down, they knew this moment meant more than either of them was ready to admit. The next evening, a technical failure at the branch forced them to work late. By the time they finished, a sudden storm had shut down transportation, leaving them stranded in the building. With nothing else to do, they sat in the branch's small lounge, sipping coffee as rain pounded against the windows. For the first time, Ethan let his guard down. He spoke about the pressure of running a corporation, the constant weight of expectations, the sacrifices he had made along the way. His voice was quieter, almost lost in thought. "Sometimes I feel like everything I've built is meaningless," he admitted, staring into his coffee cup. Emma studied him for a moment before responding. "Maybe the problem is what you chose to value." He looked up, caught off guard by the honesty in her words. "And you, Emma?" he asked. "Why are you still here, pushing through all of this?" She smiled thoughtfully. "Because I believe I can make a difference. And despite everything, I believe you can too." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else, something heavier. When their eyes met, time seemed to slow. For a second, just a second, Ethan almost leaned in. But he was the first to look away. Still, the weight of that moment lingered, following him long after the rain had stopped. In the days that followed, Ethan and Emma worked side by side, tackling the branch's challenges together. Their partnership became unexpectedly seamless, their clashes evolving into something resembling trust. There were still moments of provocation, still the occasional challenge, but underneath it all, something had shifted. One evening, after yet another successful meeting, Ethan walked Emma back to her hotel. As they reached the door, he hesitated. "Emma," he said, his voice unusually serious, "I need to admit something." She turned to him, intrigued. "What is it?" He exhaled, searching for the right words. "You make me question a lot of things, about myself, about how I've been running my life." Emma didn't respond immediately, but the way she looked at him, steady, knowing, spoke louder than words. "Maybe that's not a bad thing, Ethan." As she disappeared into the hotel, Ethan remained at the entrance, watching her go. And for the first time, he admitted to himself what he had been trying to ignore. He was falling for her. He just wasn't sure if he was ready to accept it. Back at Sinclair Enterprises headquarters, Ethan's mind was more restless than ever. Because this wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about her. And that changed everything. The trip to the European branch had changed everything. Ethan Sinclair could no longer deny that his relationship with Emma Brooks had shifted. The sharp remarks? The constant battle for dominance. Somehow, they had given way to moments of real understanding. But acknowledging what he felt meant surrendering control. And control was something Ethan wasn't willing to lose. Emma, on the other hand, had also sensed the shift. She tried to maintain their usual professional distance, but the memories of their time abroad lingered in her mind. She was starting to see him as more than just the arrogant CEO she had once despised. And that terrified her. At their first executive meeting since returning, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Emma presented a new initiative, one designed to strengthen transparency within the company. The project required a significant investment in employee training programs and benefits. At the far end of the table, Ethan sat quietly, waiting for her to finish before speaking. "This is ambitious," he said, his tone neutral. "But you're overlooking the financial strain. We're in the middle of a slow recovery. Adding costs now isn't feasible." Emma remained composed. "We've already seen proof that investing in employees increases productivity and reduces turnover. This isn't an expense, it's a strategic investment." Ethan leaned back, his lips curling into a smirk. Strategic? He echoed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. It sounds more like a gamble that could push us further into the red. Emma felt frustration simmer beneath her calm exterior, but she refused to let it show. So what's your solution? She challenged. Continue down the same path that got us into this mess in the first place? Silence settled over the room as the other executives glanced between them, watching the power struggle unfold. Finally, Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. Do what you want, but don't say I didn't warn you. After the meeting, Emma didn't wait. She walked straight to Ethan's office, pushing the door open without knocking. He was sitting at his desk, staring at a report he clearly wasn't reading. Can we talk? She asked, arms crossed. Ethan looked up, surprised, but gestured for her to enter. What is it now? Emma took a deep breath. Why are you making this so difficult? You know that what I'm proposing is the best thing for the company. Ethan set the report aside and met her gaze. His next words slipped out before he could stop them. Maybe because you make me feel like I'm losing control. Emma froze, caught off guard. What do you mean by that? She asked hesitantly. Ethan stood and walked to the window, running a hand through his hair as he searched for the right words. Since you stepped into this position, you've challenged everything I believed about leadership, about how things should be done. And worse, he admitted, his voice quieter now, you've made me question things I never wanted to think about. Emma's heartbeat quickened, but she kept her voice steady. Maybe that's a good thing, Ethan. He let out a quiet, humorless chuckle. Good? It's driving me insane. The silence that followed was thick with tension, unspoken, undeniable. Emma took a step closer. Maybe it's time you stop fighting it, she said softly, and start understanding what's really happening here. Ethan turned to face her, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made the space between them feel dangerously small. And what exactly is happening, Emma? She didn't answer. But the way they looked at each other, neither backing down, neither moving away, said more than words ever could. That night, Emma was the last to leave the office. As she walked down the empty hallway, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she found Ethan standing there, his expression a mix of hesitation and resolve. Emma? He started, his voice lower than usual, almost uncertain. She waited, not saying a word, sensing something different in the way he looked at her. I can't keep pretending this isn't happening, he finally admitted. Emma held her breath, waiting for him to continue. Ethan Sinclair's voice was quiet but certain. You've changed everything, he admitted. I don't know if I'm ready for it, but I know I don't want to fight it anymore. Emma Brooks felt her heart race, but she held his gaze, steady and unshaken. So what do you want to do, Ethan? He took a step closer, narrowing the space between them. I want to stop pretending I don't care. I want to be honest about how I feel. Before Emma could respond, Ethan made a bold move. He reached for her hand, his touch light, as if asking for permission. When she didn't pull away, he leaned in. Their lips met in a slow, unspoken confession, tender yet filled with all the tension they had been suppressing for so long. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a shift, a silent acknowledgement of something that had been building between them for months. When they finally parted, Emma pulled back slightly, still holding on to his hand. This changes everything, she murmured. Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable but serious. I know, but I think we're ready for this. Emma wasn't sure if he was right, but something deep inside told her it was a risk worth taking. As she left that night, she couldn't shake the image of Ethan's gaze from her mind. Something between them had shifted, and nothing would ever be the same. The next day, both Emma and Ethan threw themselves into work, determined not to let personal feelings interfere with business. But fate had other plans. A week after the kiss, Emma received an anonymous email. Attached was a confidential document, one that revealed unethical practices carried out under Ethan's direct supervision years ago. The incidents were from the past, but if the information went public, the consequences could be devastating. Not just for him, but for the company. Emma's stomach twisted. Confronting Ethan meant risking the fragile trust they were building. Ignoring the documents, however, went against everything she believed in. For now, she chose to wait. But Ethan noticed the change in her. At meetings, she was still professional, still sharp, but something in her demeanor had shifted. Her usual directness felt restrained, as if she were carrying the weight of something unspoken. When they were alone in the hallway, he finally asked, "Emma, are you okay?" "I'm fine. Just focused on work," she replied, avoiding his gaze. He narrowed his eyes, unconvinced. But for now, he let it go. Days later, during a critical board meeting, chaos erupted. The confidential documents Emma had received had been leaked to the press. Headlines exploded across news outlets, accusing Ethan of past unethical practices. The boardroom descended into an uproar, executives speaking over one another, demanding immediate explanations. Let's play a little trick on those who only read the comments. Type T if you've read this far. Only real ones will get it. Now, back to the story. Ethan sat frozen for a moment, his mind racing. How had this information gotten out? Then his gaze landed on Emma. A realization hit him like a punch to the gut. "Was it you?" he asked, his voice low but edged with accusation. Emma's eyes widened in shock. "Of course not. Of course not. Do you really think I would risk everything like this?" Ethan ignored the chaos around them, his focus locked on her. "You knew about these documents, didn't you?" A pause. A flicker of hesitation. "Yes," she admitted, "but I didn't leak them." Ethan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You should have come to me." His voice was quiet, but the weight behind his words was heavy. "You let this happen, and now you want me to believe you had nothing to do with it?" Before Emma could respond, a board member interrupted. "We need solutions, not arguments. Sinclair, this could ruin both your reputation and the company." The meeting continued, but the damage had already been done. A crack had formed. And neither of them knew if it could be repaired. The board meeting had ended, but the tension between Ethan Sinclair and Emma Brooks remained. Later that evening, Ethan stormed into Emma's office and slammed the door shut behind him. His jaw was tight, frustration burning in his eyes. "You should have trusted me," he snapped. "Instead, you kept this hidden like a weapon." Emma shot up from her chair, her own anger flaring. "Do you really think I would do anything to hurt the company? I received the documents anonymously. I was trying to figure out how to handle it without turning everything into a disaster." "Well, congratulations," Ethan said coldly, crossing his arms, "because you caused exactly what you were trying to avoid." Emma exhaled sharply, trying to steady herself. "You know what your problem is, Ethan?" she said, her voice controlled but firm. "You don't trust anyone but yourself. You can't see that some of us are actually here to help, not to threaten your precious control." Ethan stepped closer, his piercing gaze locked onto hers. "And you don't understand what it's like to carry the weight of all this," he shot back. "This isn't just a company, Emma. It's my life." Emma didn't flinch. "Maybe it's time you stop acting like it's only about you." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then, Ethan took a step back and shook his head. His voice was quieter this time, but the words still cut deep. "I think I made a mistake." Emma's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. "I shouldn't have mixed personal with professional," he muttered. Her chest ached, but she refused to let him see it. Instead, she folded her arms. "Maybe you're right." Ethan hesitated for a moment. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. And he didn't look back. In the days that followed, Ethan and Emma barely exchanged words. The company was in crisis, and both were laser-focused on controlling the fallout. Public relations worked around the clock to contain the damage. Internal investigations were launched. Investors demanded answers. But the silence between Ethan and Emma was unbearable. Despite her anger, Emma couldn't ignore the weight of what had happened. Even after their heated confrontation, she knew there was something real between them. Ethan, for his part, felt equally torn. He didn't want to admit it, but he missed her. Missed their arguments, missed her presence, missed the way she challenged him. But he had doubted her, and maybe that was something she would never forgive. Then the truth surfaced. After an internal investigation, it was revealed that the leak had come from within the company. A longtime executive, someone Ethan had trusted, had leaked the documents in a calculated move to weaken him and take over as CEO. When Ethan found out, relief and guilt hit him at once. Emma had been telling the truth all along, and he had been too blinded by his own fears to see it. That evening, he found himself outside her office. For the first time in a long time, he felt uncertain. Taking a deep breath, he knocked and stepped inside. Emma looked up, clearly surprised to see him. I found out who leaked the documents, he said, his voice quieter than usual. She raised an eyebrow. And it wasn't you, he added, regret lacing his words. Emma didn't respond immediately. She simply waited, letting him speak. I was wrong to doubt you. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. You doubted me because you've never seen me as an equal, she said evenly. You've always assumed you were above me, Ethan, and that's what needs to change. He exhaled, nodding slowly. You're right. His voice held none of its usual sharpness, only sincerity. And I want to change that, if you'll give me the chance. Emma studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I'll think about it, she finally said. The wounds between them were still fresh, but they both knew this conversation was an important first step. As Emma watched Ethan walk out of her office, she realized something. For the first time, he genuinely wanted to change. A week passed, and the tension between them remained. They barely spoke, both absorbed in their responsibilities, but the weight of what had happened lingered between them like an unfinished sentence. Then, an unexpected opportunity for reconciliation arrived. A prestigious gala was scheduled, a luxurious evening gathering Sinclair Enterprises' top partners and investors. The venue was breathtaking, a garden bathed in warm golden light, delicate chandeliers hanging from trees, soft classical music drifting through the air. Emma arrived alone. She wore a long black gown that exuded confidence and quiet elegance. Her hair was swept back into a graceful updo, and the subtle smile on her lips turned heads as she walked through the crowd. And across the room, Ethan saw her, and he couldn't look away. As soon as Emma Brooks stepped into the gala, murmurs of admiration rippled through the room. Ethan Sinclair, already engaged in conversation with key investors, instinctively turned toward the entrance, and for a moment he forgot how to breathe. Emma looked different that night, almost unreal. It wasn't just her striking beauty, it was the quiet confidence, the strength in her posture, the way she carried herself as if she owned every room she entered. She moved effortlessly through the crowd, laughing and speaking with an ease that made people gravitate toward her. She was magnetic, unshakable. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt vulnerable in front of someone. But he also knew one thing with certainty: he needed to talk to her. For hours he watched her from a distance, stealing glances as she worked the room. But eventually, enough was enough. It was time. He found her near a table, speaking with a group of investors. The moment he approached, the conversation naturally dissolved, leaving just the two of them. Emma, he said, his voice quieter, more serious than usual. Can we talk? She hesitated, but there was something in her eyes. Something that told him she knew this moment was inevitable. Sure. Ethan led her outside, into a small garden illuminated by fairy lights and flickering candles. The soft rustle of the trees, the distant melody of music, it all created an atmosphere that felt almost unreal. When they stopped beneath an arch draped with flowers, Ethan turned to face her, suddenly unsure of how to begin. You look beautiful tonight, he finally said, the words slipping out before he could think. Emma smiled slightly, but kept her composure. Thank you, Ethan. But I'm guessing that's not why you brought me out here. He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. No, it's not. A beat of silence passed before he exhaled, finally voicing the thoughts that had been tormenting him for weeks. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened between us, he admitted, about how things got out of control. Emma folded her arms, waiting for him to continue. I was an idiot, he said. Doubting you was my biggest mistake. But the thing that bothers me the most isn't just that. Ethan took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. It's the fact that, since the moment I met you, you've been changing the way I see the world. He let out a small breath. And honestly, that scares me. Emma blinked, caught off guard by his honesty. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Ethan, she began, but he interrupted gently. No, let me finish. His voice was softer now, raw in a way she had never heard before. You make me want to be a better person, Emma, he confessed. And I don't know what to do with that except to tell you that He hesitated, his eyes searching hers. That I need you. In every way. Before Emma could respond, Ethan closed the remaining space between them, and then he kissed her. This time there was no hesitation, no suppressed emotions. It was deeper. Sincere. A silent confession of everything he had been holding back. Emma responded instinctively, her hands resting against his chest, her mind spinning with emotions she couldn't yet name. When they finally pulled apart, neither spoke. They just stood there, breathing in the quiet moment, the stars above them witnessing something that neither of them had planned, but neither of them could deny. Before they could say anything, an assistant hurried toward them, breaking the moment. "Mr. Sinclair, I'm sorry to interrupt, but something urgent needs your attention." Ethan exhaled heavily, reluctant to leave, but knowing he had no choice. He turned back to Emma, his eyes still carrying the weight of what had just happened. "Don't go anywhere," he murmured. "I'll be back as soon as I can." Emma nodded, watching as he disappeared into the crowd. She stayed in the garden, still trying to process everything that had just unfolded. Then, 10 minutes later, Ethan returned, but something was different. His expression was no longer soft or hesitant, it was sharp, tense. "What happened?" Emma asked immediately, sensing the shift in his demeanor. Ethan lowered his voice. "I just got some information. One of the investors is trying to take advantage of the recent crisis. He's planning to acquire a significant portion of the company's shares to manipulate the board against me." Emma's expression darkened. "Who?" Ethan hesitated before saying the name. "Henry Lancaster." Emma froze. Henry had always supported her, always encouraged the changes she had been implementing. Hearing that he was moving behind the scenes felt like a betrayal. She inhaled slowly, trying to piece it together. "That makes sense," she finally murmured. "He's always been strategic, but I never." Emma Brooks exhaled slowly, trying to process what Ethan Sinclair had just told her. "I never imagined Henry would turn against you like this," she admitted. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "I don't know how to handle this without making things worse." Emma reached out, lightly touching his arm. He looked at her, surprised by the gesture. "We'll deal with this together," she said simply, and she meant it. In the days that followed, Emma and Ethan worked relentlessly to counter Henry Lancaster's moves. They secured key allies on the board, built a strategic defense, and pushed forward initiatives that not only protected Ethan's position, but also strengthened the company amidst the crisis. Through it all, their partnership solidified. There were still challenges, conflicts, compromises, and the constant weight of scrutiny. But they both knew one undeniable truth. They were stronger together than apart. That night, after yet another intense board meeting, Ethan walked Emma to her office door. Before she could go inside, he gently took her hand, his grip firm but uncharacteristically tender. "Whatever happens," he said, his voice quieter than usual, "I don't want to lose what we have." Emma smiled, sensing for the first time that Ethan was being completely honest with himself and with her. The next morning, while Emma was reviewing reports, her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "I need you with me tonight. Prepare for something special." She stared at the screen, intrigued. Ethan rarely made plans without detailing exactly what he expected. Later that evening, she arrived at an upscale restaurant in the heart of the city. As she stepped inside, she spotted him at a reserved table, impeccably dressed. The setting was intimate, soft candlelight flickering against polished glass, a quiet melody playing in the background. "What's all this?" Emma asked as she sat down. Ethan smirked. "I thought we deserved a break from charts, reports, and corporate chaos." For the first time in a long while, Emma allowed herself to relax. The evening unfolded effortlessly, with them reminiscing over past battles and even laughing at some of their previous clashes. But as dinner neared its end, Ethan's demeanor shifted. There was something heavier in his expression. "Emma, there's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice measured. She leaned in slightly, waiting. Ethan took a deep breath. "I've been invited to lead a merger with an international firm. It's a huge opportunity, but it comes with a price." Emma's stomach tightened. "And the price is?" "I'd have to step away from Sinclair Enterprises for at least a year to oversee the negotiations and integration." She swallowed hard. "And you're accepting?" "It's not about what I want," he admitted. "It's about what's best for the company. This could ensure its stability for years to come." Emma knew he was right, but that didn't make it hurt any less. Despite all the challenges, they had built something together. Not just in the boardroom, but beyond. The idea of moving forward without him felt daunting. "So what happens to this?" she asked hesitantly. Ethan reached for her hand, his touch steady despite the uncertainty in his voice. "I don't know what it will look like," he admitted. "But I want you to know, this doesn't change what I feel for you." Emma nodded, but deep down she knew they were standing at a crossroads, and she wasn't sure which path they'd take. The next morning, as Emma was still processing the news, another unexpected twist emerged. Henry Lancaster had called for an emergency board meeting. His agenda? A formal proposal to replace Ethan as CEO during his absence. It was a calculated power move, one designed to seize control while Ethan was gone. Emma arrived at the meeting room, her determination unwavering. Henry spoke first, delivering veiled criticisms of the current leadership. "It's time for a bolder, more modern vision," he said smoothly. Emma leaned forward, her voice calm but sharp. "Your bold vision seems to ignore the values we've been trying to rebuild," she countered. "This company needs consistency and integrity, not power games." Henry smiled, but she caught the flicker of irritation in his eyes. "And who exactly do you suggest should lead in Ethan's absence?" he asked, feigning curiosity. The room fell silent. Emma knew she had a choice to make. She could step back and allow Henry to take control, or she could step forward and claim her place. Steeling herself, she rose to her feet, her gaze locked on Henry's, and then, with quiet certainty, she made her decision. Emma Brooks didn't hesitate. "If necessary, yes, I'll step up," she said, her voice steady. A hush fell over the boardroom as Henry Lancaster studied her. After the meeting, Emma headed straight to Ethan Sinclair's office. He was already waiting, leaning against his desk, arms crossed. "So, you really told the board you'd take over?" he asked, his tone laced with both surprise and admiration. Emma met his gaze without hesitation. "I won't let Henry throw this company into chaos. We've worked too hard to rebuild something solid, and I refuse to let him tear it apart." Ethan stepped closer, reaching for her hands. "You know what this means, right? More pressure. More challenges." "I know," she said, squeezing his hands lightly. "But I also know it's worth it." He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You're incredible. You know that?" Emma smiled softly. "I'm just trying to do the right thing." The night before the board's final decision, Ethan invited Emma to meet him. This time he didn't take her to another office or boardroom. Instead, he brought her to a secluded pier where a yacht awaited them. "I thought we could use some fresh air before making big decisions," he said as the boat glided smoothly over the water, the city lights twinkling in the distance. They talked for hours, letting their guard down in a way they rarely did. Then, suddenly, Ethan stopped mid-conversation and turned to face her fully. "Emma, there's something I want to ask you before I leave." She tilted her head, puzzled, as he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I know things between us started complicated," he admitted, "but you've changed the way I see the world, and I don't want to lose that. I want you by my side, no matter where I am." Emma's heart pounded as he slowly opened the box, revealing a ring. Her breath caught. "Are you proposing?" Ethan's voice was steady. "Yes, Emma, will you stay with me? Not just in the company, but in life." For the first time in a long time, she was speechless. But the smile that spread across her lips gave him the answer before she even spoke. "Yes, Ethan." As the waves lapped gently against the boat, they both knew that together they could face anything. The morning after Ethan's unexpected proposal, reality hit Emma like a tidal wave. Her yes had come from pure, raw emotion. But with Ethan preparing to leave the company for a year and the board's growing tensions, their promise to stay together felt more fragile than ever. Emma barely had time to process what had happened before she was thrown into yet another battle. Leaks continued to fuel media speculation. Investors were growing restless. And Henry Lancaster? He was relentless. At the first meeting of the day, Henry wasted no time making his move. Sitting at the head of the table, he leaned back in his chair, his usual smug confidence on full display. "With all due respect, Miss Brooks," he began smoothly, "I think your approach is overly optimistic given the critical moment we're facing. Perhaps we need more experienced leadership to handle investor concerns." Emma had expected this attack. She kept her expression neutral and replied calmly, "Optimism isn't the issue, Mr. Lancaster. The issue is a lack of commitment to a long-term vision. Investors need stability, and that's exactly what I'm offering." But Henry had come prepared. Sliding a thick folder across the table, he smirked. Then perhaps you can explain why some of your recent projects are over budget. That doesn't exactly inspire confidence. Emma opened the folder. Her stomach dropped. The numbers were wrong, deliberately altered to paint her projects as financial disasters. It was a calculated, dirty move. She closed the folder and met Henry's gaze directly. "These numbers are inaccurate," she said evenly. "If someone is manipulating data, they'd better reconsider before this goes public." A heavy silence filled the room. Henry didn't respond, but the glint in his eyes made it clear. He wasn't backing down. As Emma fought her battle at Sinclair Enterprises, Ethan faced his own dilemma. He was buried in endless meetings, negotiating terms for the merger. But no matter how much he tried to focus, his mind kept drifting back to her. He knew she was under immense pressure, and for the first time, he wondered if leaving the company now was a mistake. Determined to find a way to protect both his future and Emma's, he made a decision, and when he returned, he knew exactly what he had to do. At the end of a long, grueling day, Emma Brooks was still at her desk, buried under stacks of reports. The weight of leadership pressed heavily on her shoulders, so when the door to her office opened unexpectedly and she looked up to see Ethan Sinclair standing there, she was genuinely surprised. "I thought you'd be taking some time off," he said, crossing his arms. Emma sighed, rubbing her temples. "I can't afford to rest while Henry keeps trying to undermine me. He's playing dirty." Ethan stepped closer, reaching for her hand. His grip was warm, grounding. "You're not in this alone, Emma," he said. "I'm here to make sure he doesn't cross the line." She exhaled slowly, some of the tension in her shoulders easing. "Thank you," she admitted, "but I can't rely on you for everything. If I want to lead, I have to face this on my own." A small smile tugged at Ethan's lips. He admired her resilience, the fire in her eyes that refused to be dimmed. "You already are," he said, "and you're doing it better than anyone could have imagined." That evening, Ethan convinced Emma to step away from work for a few hours. He took her to a quiet, tucked-away restaurant, somewhere they wouldn't be interrupted. Just for one night, he wanted them to breathe, to exist outside the chaos. Over dinner, their conversation turned personal. "Have you ever thought about where we'd be if that night at the gala hadn't happened?" Ethan asked, a playful glint in his eyes. Emma chuckled, shaking her head. "We'd probably still hate each other." "Or pretending to hate each other," Ethan corrected with a teasing smile. She rolled her eyes but smiled anyway. For a moment, everything felt easy. Then Emma's phone rang. She hesitated before answering. It was a trusted executive. "Emma, you need to get back to the office. Something urgent has come up." She looked at Ethan, concern flickering in her eyes. "Well," he said, standing up, "looks like our break is over." When they arrived at the office, Emma was met with another crisis. More confidential documents had been leaked. This time, they weren't just exposing past scandals, they detailed the company's internal strategy for the future. Plans that were meant to reassure investors had now become fuel for speculation. The media had already picked up the story. Investors were demanding answers. Emma flipped through the papers, her mind racing. "These leaks were designed to undermine confidence in my leadership," she said, her voice tight. Ethan, scanning the documents beside her, felt his own anger rise. "This is Henry," he said, his tone unwavering. "He's trying to destroy you and consolidate his control over the board." Emma took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay composed. "Then we need to act before he succeeds." For the rest of the night, Emma and Ethan worked side by side. They pored over every piece of data, searching for a direct link between Henry and the leaks. They needed undeniable proof, something that would make it impossible for him to escape the consequences. Despite the chaos surrounding them, there was an odd sense of solace in working together. Ethan glanced at Emma, watching her determination in action. "Do you realize you're handling this better than I ever could?" he asked suddenly. Emma looked up, surprised. "I never thought I'd hear that from you." A small, genuine smile touched his lips. "You amaze me every day." As the first light of dawn crept into the office, Emma finally found what they needed. A series of emails, from Henry to a journalist. The messages detailed the leaked documents and outlined his next moves, clear, undeniable evidence of his betrayal. Emma turned to Ethan, her hands gripping the printed copies. "We got him." Ethan took the pages, scanning them with a slow, satisfied nod. I knew you would. For the first time, Emma felt like they had a real advantage, but she also knew the battle was far from over. Henry Lancaster was a powerful man, and taking him down wouldn't be easy. The office was silent as they reviewed the incriminating emails, each line reinforcing the depth of Henry's manipulation. But the feeling of relief was brief. Revealing this information would be a dangerous move. Henry had influence, connections, and a ruthless ability to turn situations in his favor. Ethan crossed his arms, watching Emma as she analyzed every detail, her focus unwavering. He knew she was carrying an immense burden, but he also knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going to break, and that made him admire her even more. Still, there was a storm coming, and they had to be ready. A heavy silence hung between them as Ethan Sinclair stared at the incriminating emails on Emma Brooks' screen. "This isn't just proof of manipulation," he said, voice low. "This is a declaration of war." Emma exhaled slowly, her fingers still resting on the keyboard. She had been preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, the weight of it felt heavier than she had imagined. "If we expose this the wrong way, he'll retaliate," Ethan continued. "Henry won't go down without a fight." Emma looked up, determination hardening her expression. "Then we need allies," she said. "We can't face Henry alone. We need people who know what he's capable of, and we need to show them the damage he's already done." Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. He was impressed by her clarity, but he also knew the risk. Trust within the board was already fragile, and asking people to take sides meant putting themselves in a vulnerable position. The next few hours were spent meticulously organizing the evidence. They compiled emails, financial records, and strategic decisions Henry had manipulated, all into a comprehensive dossier that left no room for denial. By the time Emma closed the last document, the clock was nearing midnight. Ethan watched her from across the room, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You should rest," he said, finally walking over. Emma smiled faintly, exhaustion clear in her eyes. "I can't rest while he's still out there." Ethan hesitated before reaching out, gently tilting her chin so she would look at him. "You don't have to carry this alone," he murmured. "We're in this together, remember?" She saw the sincerity in his eyes and for once allowed herself to lean into it. Accepting help had never come easily to her, but with Ethan, it felt different. At sunrise, Emma and Ethan arrived at the office before anyone else. They had called an emergency meeting with key board members, the ones who had remained undecided about the company's leadership. When everyone was seated, Emma took a deep breath and stepped forward, the dossier clutched firmly in her hands. "Thank you for coming in early," she began, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "What I have to say isn't easy, but it's necessary." She laid out the evidence, piece by piece, detailing how Henry had used his position to manipulate internal decisions, leak confidential information, and actively undermine company leadership. The board members listened in silence, absorbing every word. When Emma finished, Robert McCain, one of the most senior members, finally spoke. "This is serious," he said, his voice measured. "But before we take any action, we need to be certain this evidence is authentic." Ethan, who had remained silent up until now, stepped forward. "I've personally verified everything," he stated firmly. "If there are doubts, we can bring in external experts, but that doesn't change the fact that Henry acted against this company and against all of us." The room remained tense. Some members looked unconvinced, unwilling to directly challenge Henry. Others, however, were visibly shaken. Emma knew this was her last chance. She looked around the room, making eye contact with each board member before speaking. "I know this isn't easy to accept," she said, her voice softer now. "But turning a blind eye to this makes us complicit. If we want to lead with integrity, we need to act now." The weight of her words settled over them. One by one, the board members began to nod, signaling their agreement. Only one or two remained hesitant, but it was clear. The majority stood with Emma and Ethan. As the meeting concluded, Emma felt a strange mix of relief and tension. They had won this round, but the war wasn't over yet. As the board members left, Ethan stayed by her side. When the room was empty, he turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You were brilliant," he murmured. Emma sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I hope it's enough." Ethan stepped closer, gently taking her hands in his. It was more than enough, he said. You're leading this in a way few could. She looked up at him, and for a moment the tension faded. All she felt was gratitude. And something else. Something deeper. Something she wasn't ready to name just yet. That night, as Emma Brooks sat at home reviewing the final steps of their plan, her phone buzzed with a message. Ethan Sinclair. Whatever happens, you've proven you're more than capable. Never doubt that. A small smile formed on her lips. For the first time, she truly believed it. But she knew the battle wasn't over yet. Henry Lancaster wasn't the kind of man to go down easily. The boardroom of Sinclair Enterprises was packed, but the air was thick with silence. Emma stood at the center, gripping the dossier, the final proof that would take Henry down. Beside her, Ethan remained still, his gaze locked onto Henry, who lounged in his leather chair, looking completely unbothered, as if he was certain none of this would touch him. Emma took a slow breath, steadying herself before she spoke. In the past few weeks, Sinclair Enterprises has faced internal threats, not from outside forces, but from within. She began, her voice calm yet commanding. The room leaned in. She flipped open the dossier and projected the documents onto the screen. Email trails, altered financial records, leaked confidential reports. Each piece of evidence wove a damning picture, and all roads led to one man, Henry Lancaster. The tension in the room tightened with each revelation. For the first time, Henry's usual smirk faltered. He shifted in his chair, attempting to mask his discomfort. And when Emma finally closed the presentation, the weight of silence filled the space. Then Henry let out a short, forced laugh and stood. "This is absurd," he scoffed. "These documents have clearly been manipulated. There's no actual proof I did anything wrong." Ethan leaned forward, his tone even but laced with warning. "Manipulated?" he repeated. "We have digital records verifying the authenticity of every document. This isn't a matter of opinion, Henry. It's fact." A flicker of unease crossed Henry's face, but he forced another chuckle. "So what's next?" he challenged. "You're going to throw me out without a full investigation? You need me to stabilize this company." Emma stepped toward him, meeting his gaze head-on. "We don't need someone who puts their own interests above the company," she said, her voice unwavering. "And we definitely don't need you to stabilize anything. We've already done that, without you." Murmurs rippled through the boardroom. Henry glanced around, searching for support. None came. Finally, Robert McCain, the most senior board member, stood. "The evidence speaks for itself," he announced. "I propose an immediate vote for Henry Lancaster's removal and that we forward this information to the proper authorities." The decision was swift, unanimous. Henry Lancaster was officially removed from Sinclair Enterprises. As security escorted him out, he cast one final glance at Emma, one filled with bitter resentment. But she didn't flinch, because she had won. As the room emptied, relief and exhaustion washed over Emma. Ethan approached her, his touch firm as he took her hands in his. "You did it," he murmured. "You saved the company." Emma smiled, though the fatigue in her eyes was undeniable. "I didn't do it alone," she admitted. "I couldn't have done it without you." Ethan's lips quirked into a soft smile. "I think we make a great team." That evening, Ethan took Emma out for a quiet celebration. A rooftop restaurant overlooking the glittering skyline, bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. For the first time in weeks, there were no crises to solve, no battles to fight, just them. As they toasted, Ethan's fingers laced through hers across the table. "You know," he said, his voice softer than usual, "after all this, I'm not going anywhere." Emma laughed lightly, shaking her head. "I thought you were set on pursuing the international merger." Ethan sighed, leaning in slightly. "The merger can wait." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What we have here." He squeezed her hand. "That's what matters most." And for the first time, Emma realized, maybe, just maybe, she had won something far greater than just a corporate battle. She had won them. What we have here is more important. Emma Brooks felt her heart skip a beat. Ethan Sinclair had always put work first. Always. Hearing him say this, that their relationship, they mattered more, felt like a milestone neither of them had ever expected to reach. Before she could respond, Ethan leaned in, kissing her softly, but with enough intensity to say everything words couldn't. For the first time, they both felt it. The future was finally in their hands. Months later, Sinclair Enterprises was thriving under Emma and Ethan's leadership. The changes they had fought for had not only brought financial success but also rebuilt the company's foundation, one built on integrity, collaboration, and trust. Emma led with her signature blend of strength and empathy, earning the respect of everyone around her. And Ethan, always the strategist, had taken on a new role, not just as a leader but as her strongest supporter. He had learned something invaluable. Leadership wasn't just about control. It was about trust. About inspiration. One evening, as they worked late in the office, Emma glanced at Ethan thoughtfully. "Do you regret staying?" she asked. He smiled, stepping closer. "Never." His voice was certain. "Staying was the best decision I've ever made." They stood in silence for a moment, just enjoying each other's presence, knowing that everything they had built, both in the company and in their hearts, was real. The struggles of the past felt like distant memories, replaced by a love that had only deepened with time. Ethan knew his life had changed forever the moment Emma had walked into it. She had challenged everything he believed about leadership, about relationships, about himself, and he had never been more grateful. One quiet evening, on the terrace of their apartment, Ethan made a decision. Taking Emma's hand, he looked into her eyes, his voice softer than usual. "Emma," he began, "from the moment I met you, you challenged everything I thought I knew, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me." Emma smiled, surprised by the tenderness in his tone. She had expected something playful, but the look in his eyes told her this was different. This was serious. "I can't imagine my life without you anymore," he continued. "You're my partner in everything, work, life, and whatever comes next." Then, without hesitation, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring. "So I want to ask you," he exhaled, a rare flicker of nervousness in his expression. "Will you marry me?" Emma's breath caught. She covered her mouth, completely stunned. Though she had known how much they loved each other, she hadn't expected Ethan to propose so spontaneously. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Ethan, I will." With steady hands, he slipped the ring onto her finger, sealing the moment with a deep, heartfelt kiss. Above them, the city lights sparkled, witnesses to the most important decision of their lives. A few months later, they stood together beneath a clear blue sky, surrounded by white flowers and the people who had been part of their journey. The wedding was intimate, elegant, exactly them. Friends, family, colleagues who had become more than just co-workers. Emma walked down the aisle in a classic lace dress, simple yet stunning, reflecting the effortless confidence she carried in every part of her life. And Ethan? He had never been one to be at a loss for words. But when he saw her, really saw her, walking toward him, eyes locked on his, he felt breathless. He had never thought he would find someone who completed him, who challenged him, who changed him. But here she was. As Emma reached the altar, everything else faded. Every battle they had fought, every challenge they had overcome, it had all led to this. The officiant began the ceremony, but for Emma and Ethan, the world disappeared. Because in that moment, nothing else mattered except them. And when it was time to exchange vows, Ethan's voice was steady, full of certainty. "Emma," he said, his eyes shining, "you're not just the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. You're the woman who changed my life." Ethan Sinclair took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving Emma Brooks. "You are the reason I believe that love can transform everything," he said, his voice full of conviction. "You taught me that true power isn't about power or control. It's about sharing, trusting, and growing together." Emma's fingers tightened around his. "I promise to be there for you through every moment, easy and hard," Ethan continued. "You are my home, my partner, my love." A tear rolled down Emma's cheek as she smiled. She took Ethan's hand in her own, her voice unwavering. "Ethan, you've shown me that even the most guarded hearts can open up," she said. "You've taught me that strength isn't about facing challenges alone, it's about facing them with someone else." Ethan squeezed her hand. "I promise to love you every day of our lives," Emma continued, "to support you in every choice you make, and to build a life worthy of everything we've fought for together." When they exchanged rings, the guests cheered, but Emma and Ethan didn't hear a thing. Because in that moment, the world belonged to them alone. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan didn't hesitate. He pulled her close, pressed his lips to hers, and promised a future filled with love, trust, and a strong bond. The reception was filled with genuine joy, laughter, music, the clinking of glasses as friends and family raised their glasses to toast the couple. Stories were shared, some funny, some deeply moving, about the journey Emma and Ethan had taken to get here. Then, to everyone's surprise, Ethan, usually reserved, always calm, rose to speak. He took the microphone, his eyes soft on Emma. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," he said. "But more than that, I want to thank Emma for changing my life." A hush fell over the crowd. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me," Ethan continued, "and I hope everyone here finds something as special as I found in you." Emma's heart sank. She had spent most of her life believing she had to fight alone. And here was a man who not only fought alongside her, but changed for her. Overwhelmed, she wrapped her arms around him, and together they danced under the soft lights of the garden as their guests watched, smiles on their faces. No one doubted it. Emma and Ethan were meant to build a life together. That night, after the last guests had left, Emma and Ethan sat alone in the garden, basking in the soft moonlight. They didn't need words. They simply held hands, knowing that together they could face anything, because this, them, was the best thing they'd ever built. And it was just the beginning. What do you think? Was Emma right to forgive Ethan? Share your thoughts in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What is your score? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories. And don't forget to check out more touching stories by clicking here on the end screen. Bookmark. Hello, and see you in the next stories.